We all sort of think we know what dance is, right? You see someone moving, maybe there's music, and you just think, oh, dancing.
It seems obvious.
But, what happens when you step outside your own culture? Does that simple idea still hold up? Adrian Kapler asked this really great question. Is the concept dance useful in studying either our own culture or others?
Yeah, that question really hits at the core of it, and it opens up this whole field dance ethnography.
Dance ethnography, so like anthropology for dance.
Pretty much, yeah. It's about looking at dance not just as a set of steps, but as something, deeply embedded in its cultural context. We're using Joan Frosch's essay, Dance Ethnography, as our main guide today. It gives a really good overview.
Okay, great. So our mission for this deep dive is to get into how researchers actually study dance across different cultures. What are the roadblocks they hit, especially when just defining dance is tricky? And why does this matter? Why should you, listening, care about this ethnographic view? We want to give you a richer way to see human movement and culture. So where should we start?
Let's tackle that concept of dance head-on. Kapler warns us, and that's a really key point, that our Western category of dance might actually, obscure how movement works in other places.
So?
Because they might not have a concept exactly like ours. They might bundle movement together with other things or categorize it totally differently. If we just impose our dance label, we might miss the point entirely.
Right. And she has that example that makes you stop and think, why do we group ballet, rock and roll, square dancing, the waltz? Why are those all dance?
But then things like ice skating or cheerleading or even a formal church procession, those aren't usually called dance in the same way.
Even though they're all structured movement, it really shows how culturally specific our definition is.
It absolutely does. And it's not just theory. Think about Sally Ann Ness studying the Sinuolog in the Philippines.
Oh, yeah. What happened there?
Well, she found that some American scholars, when they saw videos of it, they actually questioned if it was even dance.
Why? Because it didn't look like a ballet or something?
Kind of. It didn't fit their expectations of what dance is or what it's for. It highlights those different cultural viewpoints perfectly.
Which connects to what Margaret Drewell says, right?
Right.
About how we tend to chop up performance. This is dance, this is music, this is theater.
Exactly. Drewell argues we should look at performance more holistically. She mentions the Akan word, agar, from Ghana.
What does that mean?
It beautifully combines dance, music, and play. It's all one concept. So our categories might actually be breaking apart something that's understood as unified elsewhere.
So the key thing is trying to grasp what these movements mean to the people doing them, from their perspective.
Precisely. It's about understanding the indigenous categories, the cultural intentions. Like Keely Homoku put it so well, dance should be studied because it is important to the people involved. Their perspective is paramount.
Okay. And the essay lays out some goals for this kind of contextual approach. It's about defining the study on its own terms, seeing performance as expressing values.
Right. How it constructs ideas about gender or status, what counts as beautiful or skilled within that culture.
And how it connects to the rest of life, rituals, work, education, everything.
Yeah, it's not isolated. It helps us understand how they organize their lives, their whole worldview, really.
So this field, dance ethnography, it didn't just pop up overnight. It has a history. What were some of the early steps?
Well, there were early attempts. Kurt Sachs's book from 1933, Eine Weltgeschichte des Tanzes, looked globally.
A world history of dance. Sounds comprehensive.
It was, but Kapler points out a problem with his perspective. He kind of saw non-Western dance as earlier, maybe less developed, stages leading up to Western dance.
Ah, that sort of evolutionary ladder idea.
Exactly. And that view doesn't really align with how anthropologists understand culture, now seeing cultures as different, not necessarily better or worse, or further along some single path.
Got it. So who helped shift that thinking?
Franz Boas was hugely influential in American anthropology. His idea of cultural relativism, understanding a culture on its own terms, not judging it by outside standards, was fundamental.
And that applied to studying dance, too.
Absolutely. It laid the groundwork. And his daughter, Franziska Boas, also played a really important role, specifically focused on dance.
What did she do?
In 1942, she organized a symposium, The Function of Dance in Human Society, a really key event.
Okay.
It brought scholars together to seriously discuss dance in different cultures. She noted they were focusing on what they then called primitive and exotic cultures.
A term we wouldn't use now, obviously.
Right. But her reasoning was that in those communities, dance seemed to have a really vital widely understood meaning and function.
So the focus was on what dance did in society, its purpose.
Exactly. It was a very functionalist approach. They had papers on Kwakil dance, African dance, Haitian dance, Balinese dance, applying that functionalist lens.
Interesting. And Dred Williams suggested Francisco Boas was maybe trying to spark discussion more than lay down a final theory?
Yeah, that's one interpretation, just getting the conversation going about this way of thinking.
It seems like around that time, the early 20th century, there was this real fascination in the West with the other, and that influenced dance performance too.
Oh, definitely. You see it in things like folk hands ballets with their Orientalist themes, partly inspired by Isadore Duncan's Freer style, photography, film. They fueled this interest.
And figures like Ruth St. Denis.
Famously inspired by an Egyptian cigarette ad that led her down a path of exploring or maybe inventing these exotic forms. And Ted Shawn actively collected dances and costumes from around the world. He even reviewed some of Gertrude Kuroth's work later on.
LeMary also started the Ethnologic Dance Institute around then, too.
Yes, Shawn called it a major clearinghouse for knowledge on ethnic dance. But, and the essay makes this crucial point, researchers who weren't European American often got overlooked, even when they made huge contributions.
Right, like Catherine Dunham. Her work sounds groundbreaking.
It really was. She studied with the anthropologist Melville Herskovits, did major fieldwork in the Caribbean, Haiti, Jamaica, Martinique, Trinidad.
And wrote Las Danzas de Haiti.
A seminal work. Herskovits saw early on how important her research was and how it fed back into her own creative work as a dancer and choreographer.
And you mentioned others too, like Mary Kawena Pukui studying hula and Pearl Primus. It seems like there's been a reevaluation, giving them the credit they deserve.
Thankfully, yes. Which brings us to Gertrude Prokosch Kuroth. She's really seen as a pivotal figure. She transitioned from performing to research.
And she wrote that essay, Panorama of Dance Ethnology, in 1960.
Yes, that's considered a landmark piece that really helped define dance ethnology as a distinct field.
And interestingly, she saw that the term ethnic dance could be problematic even back then.
She did. She argued for a broader view, suggesting dance ethnology should include ballet, jazz, modern dance, not just forms labeled ethnic. For her, it wasn't about a type of dance, but an approach.
An anthropological approach to the place of dance in human life.
Exactly. She even detailed her research methods: prep, fieldwork, lab study, analyzing style, working with native experts. She called them collaborators, which was important. Notation, analysis, synthesis, the whole process.
Wow, quite a comprehensive framework.
It was, though she admitted finding it hard to really integrate the artistic side with the cultural analysis. And Kapler notes that while Kuroth gathered invaluable detailed data, she maybe didn't have a huge direct impact on anthropology grad students right away in the 60s and 70s.
But her work provided a foundation, and then Joanne Kilionohomoku built on that.
Yes, focusing on Hopi dance and Hawaiian hula, and co-founding cross-cultural dance resources, she definitely carried the torch.
And Allegra Fuller-Snyder.
Also key. Influenced by Edward T. Hall, developed the dance ethnology program at UCLA. She came up with concepts like the dance symbol, thinking about the dancer, costume, objects together, and her levels of event patterns. Yvonne Daniel later built on that framework too.
It's really interesting seeing all these different threads, different scholars developing ways to look at dance and culture. Kapler took a different path again, right? Using linguistics.
Yes, her focus was Polynesia, and she applied linguistic analogies to understand dance structures. And then you have Dred Williams wanting to talk more broadly about dancing and moving.
She developed semasiology.
Right, focusing on how movement itself makes meaning, moving beyond just social function. It's about humans as meaning makers through movement.
And the essay lists so many others, too. Hannah, Royce, Matoma, Sweet, Youngerman, Van Zyl, Daniel, Druel, Farnell, Ness. It's clearly a field with many voices.
It is a rich tapestry of approaches.
So with all these people working, was there a push to standardize things, to find the system for studying dance cross-culturally?
That was definitely a question in the air. The first Chord conference in '67 sounded pretty formative. Someone apparently listed enthusiasm and a quick eye as essentials for studying ethnic dance.
Okay, so things were still developing.
Very much so. But by the 1972 Chord Conference, things were more focused. The theme was Anthropology of Dance, honoring Kuroth. Alan Merriam, big in ethnomusicology, gave a keynote really pushing for a more systematic research approach.
People were looking for tools, for methods.
Yeah, Royce reviewed the existing literature, Keeley and Ahomoku offered field guides for non-dance folks, and then came Alan Lomax's choreometrics.
Ah, choreometrics. That sounds like a big attempt at a system.
It was ambitious, developed with Bartneff and Pauli using Laban's effort shape theory. The idea was to analyze filmed dance from all over the world, looking for patterns in movement style.
Without relying on the dancer's own explanations.
Largely, yes. Lomax categorized global movement styles and even tried to correlate them with things like technology levels and social structures. He made a film, Dance in Human History, and the Global Jukebox Project.
But that brings up a big question, doesn't it? The essay asks, whose system is it?
Exactly. Imposing an external framework like that risks objectifying cultures, maybe missing the nuances. That kind of universalizing approach faced criticism.
So the field generally moved away from seeking one single system.
I think so. There's more emphasis now on understanding each context, using frameworks that emerge more from the culture being studied, or at least being very aware of the framework you are using.
Okay, so if grand systems have limits, what are some of the other challenges or newer directions in dance ethnography?
Well, one inherent challenge is just the nature of dance. It's ephemeral, right? It disappears as it happens. Druhl argues that research methods that value concrete objects have historically kind of undervalued dance because it isn't a thing you can easily collect.
And maybe deeper cultural biases play a role too.
Absolutely. That mind-body split common in Western thought, the tendency to see the body and physical experience as somehow less important or less intellectual than the mind, that can definitely hinder the study of embodied knowledge like dance.
It makes dance almost invisible in some academic circles.
It can, yeah. The essay also points to other challenges, like sometimes relying on older theories or just the limited number of PhD programs specifically focused on this.
And even what to call the field is debated. Dance ethnology, anthropology of dance, ethnochoreology.
Right. It reflects slightly different emphasis.
Yeah.
Keeley and Ahomoku preferred anthropology of dance or ethnochoreology, feeling dance ethnology might sound too purely descriptive.
While Kapler worried choreology focused too much on the steps, not the context.
Exactly. And Drid Williams often just said the dance or human movement. But dance ethnography seems to have stuck as a common term, maybe because ethnographic methods just fit so well.
Okay, so let's dig into that. What is ethnography as a method, especially for dance?
Basically, ethnography means writing about people. It's about deep immersion, describing a culture richly by being there. The core method is participant observation.
So you're not just watching, you're joining in.
You got it. Whether it's a culture far away or a subculture in your own city, you spend significant time there. You try to learn the ropes, learn the language, the customs, and in dance ethnography, you often learn the dances.
Trying to see things from the inside while also keeping an analytical perspective.
Exactly. You're trying to understand it from the emic or insider view and the etic or outsider view. The goal is understanding on its own terms, though Frosch notes that's always an aspiration, maybe never fully reachable.
And ethnography isn't just for anthropologists anymore.
No, it's used everywhere: sociology, education, communication. Anthony Seeger argues it's really a flexible research tool, not tied to one discipline. And for dance, as Deidre Sklar points out, it makes sense because so much of cultural knowledge is in the body, expressed through movement.
Participant observation seems like a natural fit for dance study. You have to participate and observe to learn dance anyway.
Totally. This compares the ethnographer learning culture to a dancer learning steps through interaction, repetition, learning from others. And Sklar talks about kinesthetic empathy.
What's that?
Using your own body's feeling of movement to understand what someone else is doing and experiencing. Especially helpful if you're less familiar with the specific dance form. Like a ballet researcher watching ballet can draw on their own physical knowledge.
Makes sense. And ethnography avoids painting cultures as static, right? It shows the complexity.
Yes, it reveals cultures as dynamic with diverse voices, internal debates, changes over time. It embraces the messiness, the contradictions, resisting easy generalizations. Detail and context are key.
And this kind of research involves building relationships. It's not just data collection.
Absolutely not. It's about long-term engagement. The people you work with become mentors, collaborators, friends. The researcher-research relationship is complex, shaped by everything: race, gender, power, skill. It requires constant reflection. Spradley's ethnographic research cycle highlights this ongoing process of questioning, observing, analyzing, writing, all while being aware of your own position.
So practically speaking, if you wanted to do dance ethnography, how do you choose a project? How do you approach fieldwork?
Well, projects come about in different ways. Personal experience, maybe a community asks for help documenting something, convenience, advice from a mentor. Ness studied the Sinulogue partly because her advisor suggested it.
And you need to define your scope, but also be flexible.
Right. Are you focusing on one specific dance or the whole dance culture? And be prepared for your focus to shift as you learn more. Yvonne Daniel started looking at Haitian dance, but ended up focusing on Cuban rumba based on her fieldwork experiences.
Gating access and permission seems critical.
Hugely. You need to figure out who to talk to, build trust, navigate local politics sometimes. Doing some initial homework is vital. Then comes the participant observation itself.
Where dancing is part of the research.
Often, yes. Daniel talks about understanding Cuban dance by actually doing it, and it requires heightened awareness. Ness talks about intensely observing everything in Cebu City, not just the dancing.
And the researcher wears many hats, insider, outsider, student, friend.
All the time. And you need to critically assess those roles and relationships constantly, being clear about your intentions, your debts, maybe even involving people in reviewing your work. Collaborative practices are really important.
Documentation is obviously key too. Field notes, recordings.
Crucial for analysis later. But always, always respect people's wishes about being recorded or photographed. The essay gives an example where a consultant didn't want certain things documented.
And field notes aren't just observations.
No, they should capture specifics, what happened, who said what, using their terms if possible, but also your own reactions, thoughts, questions. Those meta notes are important too, and keeping them organized.
What about formal dance notation, like lab notation?
It can be a tool. Lab notation is very detailed, good for complex choreography, but complex to learn and use widely. Benesh notation is more common in ballet.
Are they always suitable, though?
Droll argues Leban notation focusing on shape might fit Western dance better than, say, African dance traditions that emphasize weight shifts and improvisation. But then Ness used Leban movement analysis effectively for the Sinulogue, focusing on the dancer's inner experience. So it depends on the question.
And film and video. Powerful tools, but potentially biased.
Yes. What you choose to film, how you frame it, that reflects your perspective. The example of the researcher overly focused on Balinese dancers' pelvises shows that potential bias. Blacking wisely cautioned that notation and film are useful, but can't capture the full subjective experience or intention. Good documentation deepens understanding. It doesn't replace it.
Okay, so after all the field work and documentation, what's the end result? The product. It's not always a book, is it?
Increasingly, no. The traditional academic focus on written articles or monographs might not serve the community studied. There's a push for more reciprocal research.
Meaning?
Research where the product is something the community also values or can use, maybe a film, a performance reconstruction, an archive, a festival, an educational program. The Ambiguity Chord Conference is cited as trying to prioritize community voices and diverse ways of sharing research.
So it's about rethinking who the research is for.
Exactly. How could it be more collaborative, more beneficial to the people who shared their knowledge? It's about socially responsible research in a post-colonial world.
Which brings us squarely to ethics. This kind of intimate, long-term research must have significant ethical dimensions.
Absolutely. The essay notes, there isn't a specific ethics code just for dance ethnography, but points to the American Anthropological Association's guidelines as very relevant.
What are some key principles there?
Things like doing no harm, being truthful about your findings and their potential impact, protecting confidentiality, using expertise responsibly, maintaining the discipline's reputation, and giving full credit to collaborators and sources. It's about responsibility to the people, the discipline, and the public.
Not poisoning the well for future researchers?
Precisely. Are participants' interests truly protected? Are their voices genuinely valued? These are ongoing, crucial questions.
And practically, this kind of research takes resources, right?
Oh, yes. Time and money, language study, library prep, the fieldwork itself, travel, equipment. It adds up. You need to plan ahead, get competent with your tools, secure access, write grant proposals.
And think about things like medical insurance, political situations.
All part of the practical planning. The Society for Ethnomusicology has a useful manual for this stuff.
So after covering all that, the essay ends with this idea. Beginning with self. What's that about?
It's an invitation, really. An encouragement for you, the listener, to turn that ethnographic lens inward. To try the exercise knowing self as other.
Studying movement in your own group.
Exactly. Pick a group you identify with and consciously observe and analyze its movement practices, its dances, broadly defined. Create your own mini personal movement ethnography. Maybe write about it, choreograph something, make a short film.
Why do that?
Because we're all experts in our own cultural movement, often without realizing it. Doing this helps you see how deeply embedded culture is in everyday movement, how pervasive it is. It makes you aware of your own assumptions, your own biases.
And that self-awareness can make you a better observer of others, more empathetic, more accurate.
That's the idea. Understanding your own cultural lens helps you appreciate others more clearly. The essay concludes by saying that dance ethnography connects to all sorts of interdisciplinary discussions, and its methods are valuable across dance research. It encourages you to follow the thread.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We've journeyed through dance ethnography today, from the challenge of defining dance
To the history of the field, the key figures like Kurath, Kepler, Kaylee Nohomoku.
emphasizing context, the insider perspective, the methods like participant observation.
The challenges, the ethical considerations, and this shift towards more collaborative and diverse research outcomes.
And hopefully this gives you a much richer way to think about human movement. It's not just steps, it's culture made visible, made tangible.
Deeply meaningful, shaping who we are and how we relate to each other.
So here's that final thought to chew on. Think about a movement you do all the time, something maybe you wouldn't even call dance. Could be how you wave hello, how you walk, a gesture you make when you talk.
Now, imagine someone from a completely different cultural background watching you. What might they see in that simple movement? What might it tell them, rightly or wrongly, about your culture, your tribe?
It's a fascinating exercise. We really encourage you to look deeper into Joan Frosch's essay or the work of the scholars we mentioned.
Yeah, this deep dive is really just scratching the surface of the incredible connection between dance and culture.